Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom with Bob Olson, who will now introduce today's show and speaker.
Welcome to the open door. I have left an open door before you, which no one can close. Open to the love of God. Open to joining His stream of love for others. And we're ready to introduce our panel for today's program. First of all, we have Dr. Rhonda Chervin, Professor of Philosophy and Catholic writer in Corpus Christi, Texas. And we have Dr. Jim Hannock in Los Angeles, philosophy professor, father of 5 children, pro-life activist, editor at New Oxford Review. And then we have Commander Al Hughes from Corpus Christi, Texas, colonel in the Air Force, a married father who converted to the church from being an agnostic, also has degrees in engineering and in pastoral studies. And now here we go to Commander Al to get us going today on the open door.
Thank you, Bob. Today's topic is the Benedict option, which I suppose began as a quiet discussion among Catholics, but somehow has exploded onto the national scene in great controversy. So we're going to take a look at it today, the Benedict option. And panel, I would suggest that we do this in 3 parts. First, try to define what is the Benedict option, and then second, why is it a topic of discussion? And finally, is it a practical option to embrace? So first of all, what is the Benedict option, panel?
Well, that being a deep subject, the fellow who coined the term, Rod Dreher, himself recently became an Orthodox Christian, having been a Roman Catholic. And that might be a point to connect with our question from Al. In my experience, Eastern Christians are more focused on their parish than on the community around them, are more aware of liturgical traditions than are Roman Catholics, and I'm speaking very generally, have a stronger sense of purpose among themselves. Oftentimes, and my experience is limited, oftentimes I think it's because the parishes are smaller and there's more ethnic commonality among them. So I could see why somebody coming from Catholicism to Orthodoxy to the public sphere, sector, discussion, and so forth, would be interested in something called the Benedict option. And of course, when you think of the Benedict option, you're not going to think of Eastern Catholicism. You're going to think of Saint Benedict and the role that the monasteries had as the Roman Empire came to fall apart. And there is also in contemporary philosophy a reference to this, and if you look into the discussion, it won't take you but half an hour to find this reference. Alistair MacIntyre, back in the 80s, wrote a book, famous book called After Virtue, and the After Virtue refers to the kind of loss of any coherent sense of distinct virtues and what they actually are. At the very end of MacIntyre's book, he talks about what we're waiting for is either a new Trotsky, someone who will put the communist option into play in a coherent way, or a new St. Benedict, although he says that in any case the new St. Benedict would be very different than the old St. Benedict. Well, at any rate, the Benedict option, I think, is, among other things, looking towards the practices of our own communities and developing those rather than trying to jump aboard the practices of the various secular institutions around us. I can think of one this week example. There's a school, the University of St. Thomas in Houston, Texas, to which I sent my daughter, hoping among other things that she could avoid the lunacy of the place where I taught for 40 years, a Jesuit institution, Loyola Marymount in Los Angeles. And Loyola Marymount in Los Angeles has done everything it possibly can do to become secular and oriented towards contemporary trends and so forth. And it's not helped by, it was already completely in place, but it's galvanized by something called Silicon Beach. It turns out that you have the Silicon Valley up north, and now in Los Angeles, right within sight of the university, there are a number of tech firms, and they've designated themselves Silicon Beach. Well, at any rate, in contrast, there's this place called the University of St. Thomas in Houston, Texas, and I say contrast up until last week, when no one in the entire philosophy department and no one in the entire English department was given a contract for the next year. And the president, who's a no-nonsense, business-oriented sort, has said that, well, with the increased interest in pre-professional programs, we're going to have to rethink the philosophy department and the English department. Now, all of this is shifting to the academic sphere, but until very, very recently, University of St. Thomas was a true Catholic university. And like so many other institutions, it's now teetering. And the teetering is a rocking teetering because of the strong personality of the president. But that would be an example of something that's Catholic/educational, going in the opposite direction, whereas something that I think would be in the direction broadly considered of the Benedict option would be Thomas Aquinas College, which has really maintained its integrity and is here in Santa Paula, California. So enough wind from this old bag of hammers.
My impression is the Benedict option really should be an in-house discussion, but it makes itself an immediate target of those who call themselves progressive, because the Benedict option is, in their view, would be completely regressive, going back to whatever century, 6th century, I think, 7th maybe. But in fact, their so-called progressivism is really neo-paganism, which is certainly regressive. So that makes the Benedict option, and in fact any movement, any faithful movement within the church immediately becomes a target for those who want to change the world in their own image. What little reading I've done regarding the Benedict option is much ado about nothing, somebody wrote, and in that, what I have read is attacking the name or attacking anything except referencing its origins, which was St. Benedict and the monastic life of the what the English like to call the Dark Ages. So the Benedict option or anything like it is going to be a target of those who consider that to be passé. What is the Benedict option? Well, it's a look back at what we can learn from Saint Benedict and from his monastic systems as they were set up. I think Jim mentioned it in the Decline and Fall of Rome. The story going that Benedict, as a young student, went into Rome to go to school, and he was horrified at what he saw, and he headed for the hills. And after a sojourn in a cave, other like-minded people began to join him in his orthodoxy, if you will. So that's the origin of the Benedict option, and there are people here in town talking about it, but I'll save that for when we get to the third part, which is it a practical option? Anyway, that's the way I see it. This sudden controversy over something that should be really an in-house matter has gone, to use current terminology, it's gone viral.
It still seems to me, I think I had the wrong impression of what it was. I was thinking it was people who want to do what happened with St. Benedict and the monasteries is during the so-called Dark Ages, is people who were strong Catholics built what used to be called a circle city around the monasteries, because the monasteries, they could get Holy Mass and the sacraments and direction in their lives. So they were small farmers, in effect, living around the monastery and cooperating with the monastic farming and so on and so forth. And then this built up so that you had around these monasteries a whole city eventually would grow up with the monasteries in the center.
And these became oases, if you will, of Christianity.
Yeah, so that's what I thought the Benedict option was, but it appears that that's not so exactly.
I think that's right. I mentioned the monasteries, but of course in my mind I also had the communities that built up around it. I am a Benedictine, an oblate, not a monk, but an oblate, and so I do have some of the historical background on all of that, but right, the whole idea was these communities that developed around the monastery.
Could you clarify what an oblate is for listeners who may not know?
Yeah, sure. Monks take formal vows of obedience and stability, and I forget the third one at the moment. An oblate is a lay person who takes the same vows, not as vows, but as simply as promises. And obedience being obedience to God, of course, ultimately, and stability in terms of living a stable, somewhat self-disciplined life. There's no poverty vow, though the monks do take that, at least in Benedictine houses. But anyway, the basic idea is that we live in parallel with the life of a monk, but not exactly the same. We have to live in the world. That's what an oblate is. Oblate, of course, means gift, right? So we give ourselves to God through that particular status.
Well,
let's look more at why has this blossomed into a national topic?
I'm not sure. It could be that a number of Catholic leaders and Catholic writers are interested in what kind of role they can play in public life and are reconsidering what they've been doing in the recent past. Another factor could be that the fellow who proposes this is just a very active blogger, clever, good writer, and gathers people's attention. And another reason could be that some concepts lend themselves to ink blot status. If, for example, this is a stretch, but we're forever talking about right and left, and that term didn't exist until...
Go ahead. I don't know where that came from.
For some reason, this right and left thing is just hung on and hung on and hung on. Certain expressions just catch fire. And then another reason, I think, is back to last week and Strangers in a Strange Land. Archbishop Chaput speaks about how there really is a difference in kind in terms of the advance of secularization. And because of that, there's a real stop. Let's think. Let's look around. Could we be going in some other way, some other fashion? And also within Christianity, there's this constant, I'm sure it's not just Christianity, but there's this constant temptation to become quietists, to just quietly live our own life and ignore everything that's going on around us. That might be part of it too. Now, getting back to Dreher, if you look at what he's written of late about his own proposal, he does give a number of examples, and some of the examples are specifically around monasteries. But he also says schools can take a look at that option, and various Catholic institutions can. My wife, for example, is a nurse, and has been a nurse for a long, long time, and the last place she worked was a place called Daniel Freeman Hospital, and it was a Catholic hospital. It was named for the fellow who gave the land for the hospital, and it made real strong contributions to the larger Englewood community for decades. And then there were fewer and fewer sisters. And then the sisters were so few that they couldn't run the hospital. And then it was purchased by one industry, the service industry, one industry after another. And now it's being torn down for a big new apartment building. Well, one reaction to that, let's not try to compete in the contemporary hospital market. Let's build small institutions that would serve smaller groups of people that would have a clear Catholic focus. That would be a temptation. I think it's a bad temptation. I shouldn't use that word. That would be an alternative. I think trying to compete as a Catholic hospital in the market today is pretty much of a lost cause. So if people realize that, then they start to think about something like the Benedict option, whatever that might be.
In one of the articles I read about this, it mentioned Ave Maria University. So I was around when this was founded, because the first president happened to be a vice president at Franciscan University of Steubenville, where I was teaching. And the whole idea was Tom Monahan of the big donut chain. The big pizza chain that Tom Monahan got used to vacation in Naples, Florida. And he bought this property in Naples, Florida, to retire to and to build a beautiful new university surrounded by a whole town. And in this town, there would be, for instance, no contraceptive sold in the drugstore and all kinds of things like that. And they would build housing that people would buy around the university. So this would be like a circle city around the university, right?
Uh-huh.
And there were lots of difficulties with it, but I don't know exactly what those difficulties were. But I don't think it may be now reviving in its original form. Does anyone happen to know about that? I was very attracted to it, but no one seemed to want to hire me there, so I didn't go.
Well, I think that would be more like the Benedict option than, say, you go from one end to the other. Notre Dame, for example. I mean, the University of Notre Dame is an example of something that had a Catholic identity and now is doing everything it can to shake it off, all the while claiming that it's not doing so, but it clearly is doing so. So I think something like Ave Maria is tricky because so much of it depended on one rich guy with a strong personality, and I think that doesn't work out. But something that has a real base to it can work out, and there are lots of steps along the way. I see it as a continuum, not just some one thing.
Okay, now one of the things that happened at Steubenville, which I thought was terrific, as that university grew into this fantastic Catholic university with all kinds of majors. So the education majors who loved the place, instead of going someplace else, they got themselves hired in the local public schools, and this resulted in the fact that these public schools became more and more oriented toward at least natural law ethics as well as other things. So instead of it being a town where if you went to the public school you would expect to get all sorts of God is dead deconstruction proclamations, instead it became a very good public school system. Well,
I think that's an excellent thing. Now, I must say it could never happen in Los Angeles because the public school system is an entrenched organ of the most secular sort, with regular celebration of the whole homosexual agenda. But see, that's an overlay of it right there. If you go to Steubenville, Ohio, you're in a really depressed area of the country, and people will sometimes welcome you with some open arms. But there are other places where that could never, ever, ever happen, and you'd be much better off homeschooling.
By the way, Rhonda,
yes?
You had a question about Ave Maria. You know, our friend T.R. and her husband Don just bought a house down there. So apparently that's still going on.
Oh, good. Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah, that just happened. And they're going to be renting it for a while, and then but eventually I guess they'll move down there.
You want to go? we can do WCAT radio out of anywhere, you know.
Oh, that's right. That's true.
As WCAT grows into a 24-hour station, we'll be more needed on many, many programs all day.
That's right.
Rhonda, would you dare to leave town and leave your spiritual director behind?
No. I'll bring you with me.
Oh, thank you so much.
I think the whole pest control industry could go to Florida to try to deal with the mosquitoes there. I mean, I don't know.
I think we're off topic, guys. I think we're off topic.
No, we might not be off topic insofar as utopian dreamers, of which I'm one.
Oh, yes.
And I've quoted this at other times, but one of my former mentors, not Al, who is my present spiritual director, but a former mentor, after listening to me for 3 years, he used to always say, every utopia becomes a gulag. And the implication was, especially if you run it, but he didn't say that to me. But, I mean, the point is...
He's politic. He's politic.
So, the point would be, you can't mean by the Benedict option, we're going to create a place where there are no more crosses, no more problems, everything will be like heaven on earth. See, and that's the utopian dream that led to, in certain ways, to communism and fascism and so forth. You know, they all had dreams of perfect societies. So we can't mean by the Benedict option that if only people would live with Catholic truth, there'd be no mosquitoes.
That's right. That's a good connection. Now, while it's certainly the case that utopias characteristically become dysutopias, I don't think that that's really a worry with the Benedict option discussion and what it might lead to. There's a Orthodox writer, Frederica Matthews Green, who's a good writer, and I haven't read things that she's written of late much, but very recently, like in the past couple of days, she said this, and I think it's worth introducing. She says, if you are directly involved in politics, Dreher is not advising you to stop. If you hold office or running for office or supporting people in office, if you're professionally involved in politics in any way, Dreher is not trying to stop you. He's noting instead that for the vast majority of Christians in America, politics is a spectator sport. We follow it and talk about it, but are not professionally involved. So we assume that everything that's important happens in the political arena, and we keep focused on it. I think what Dreher wants to say is that what's wrong with our culture cannot be solved by politics in terms of the social, cultural, and moral issues. Popular opinion has been marching steadily to the left for 50 years. The vast majority of Americans actually likes those changes in morality. They like the freedom to do whatever they want. There's no conservative majority to energize on social issues because the majority wants things just as they are, or more so. Now, an example of that, and you know, we run from a large thing to a personal experience. I can remember in the days when Operation Rescue wanted to picket abortionists' homes, and I joined in that, and I probably would do it again. But in terms of political impact, what that mostly does is make people in the neighborhood where the abortionists live mad, and it generates a lot of bad publicity, and the majority really do like things the way they are, in many cases. So the Benedict option says, look, if you're thinking of taming what's going on, you better look real carefully, because it's probably not tameable the way it is.
Yeah, I think that's why, Al. I think that's why I see the option being exercised as withdrawing into your own faithful community, whether it's your own family or a parish or just a group of families. I know particularly here in Corpus Christi, there are many families who have withdrawn from the school systems and are teaching their kids at home. There are many families that search out the least progressive parish they can find and go there. So there are communities. It's kind of nebulous. It's kind of like like the gases surrounding a star that slowly come together into planets, and that's what I see as a metaphor for the Benedict option. Is homeschooling is part of it, But I also know that there are places in the country, I read and hear about them, where groups of families have all bought homes in the same neighborhood, usually the same street, and they are forming themselves into small Christian communities within the community, within the broader community. And all of those things to me are signs of a quiet but steady movement by those who wish to remain faithful to the Christian ideal and ethic and the truth of the one that is the truth.
I think that's right. Now, there is another option. And some of us call it the Guy Fawkes option. That was a joke. I retract that joke.
Okay.
No, I just alternatives.
I didn't understand it, Jim. You want to explain the joke? I didn't get it.
Guy Fawkes, a group that supposedly plotted to blow up the English Parliament.
That guy.
I see. You didn't want the listeners and us to decide it's time for violent revolution.
No, it certainly isn't. It never is. It certainly isn't now. Just by way of contrast. I mean, there are elements that are worth pursuing there. I mean, we sometimes talk about growing persecution, and of course there couldn't have been much more persecution than there was in the time of Guy Fawkes, and we sometimes talk about young and headstrong people, and that's what that group was, and we sometimes talk about how they can be used by agent provocateurs, as that group was. So if you look around enough in history, you're going to find examples of things that are contemporary. One of the things that Rod Dreher talks about, just as an example, he says the Bruderhof are a form of the Benedict option. The various Amish groups are a form of that, not our form, but it's always an alternative to trying to jump into a secular society. I think at the other extreme is this whole business, the whole John F. Kennedy syndrome. I can remember once upon a time when I started teaching, I shared an office with a redoubtable Jesuit, Father Robert Taylor, and he had 3 pictures on his wall. He's sort of a Spartan fellow. Top picture was from the Sistine Chapel, God reaching down to Adam. Underneath that, there was a Salvador Dali impressionistic picture of an altar, and underneath that, there was the inauguration of John F. Kennedy. And that was, wow, was he ever misguided?
Well, no, I'm much older than you, Jim. So
not that much.
Well, enough so when Kennedy first got in, all Catholics thought this was fantastic.
No,
we had no idea, many Catholics. It was only later that we began to realize that it was a problem.
And that's an example of a sucker punch. I mean, speak no ill of the dead, but nothing that the people accused of sexual improprieties today could rival what Kennedy was actively engaged in right up into the White House. So,
but we didn't know all that at the beginning.
Yeah, but plenty of people did know. It's just that
I don't think Father Taylor knew.
No, I know because he shared a kind of mystique that was propagated by Jesuit schools, and it was rotten through and through, eaten out by termites, and they didn't even know it. Later, he repented himself of that. But if you're looking for something that's the opposite of the Benedict option, that would be the opposite.
Al again. I like sometimes to remember the cartoon character, and Rhonda mentioned older people. I guess that's all of us. We will remember Pogo the Possum, and what he said was that we have met the enemy, and he is us. And use that to springboard that even in some of these experimental communities that you can sniff out a little bit of Benedict option there, they are still populated by people. And in any group, you will find someone who wants to rise to the top and take command, and then the temptation immediately becomes to remake whatever the group is in his own image. And whether he does that knowingly or not, that's a very high risk of anybody who takes a leadership position. Let's see. It was Benedict, by the way, who told his abbots that before you make a serious decision, always talk to the youngest monk. And I tried that when I was a base commander, and it worked like a charm, because it turns out that the least person in an organization, in my case on an air base, the least person is the one who knows what's really going on, as opposed to what everybody is telling the commander is going on. And so, from Benedict to Hughes, my advice would be, if anyone who wants to organize anything, remember that if you organize something, always consult with the least member before you and his ilk before you make any big decisions.
Oh, now I wanted to bring in an example that we have right here in Corpus Christi, Texas. There's a parish called St. Helena's, and many people go there, but a whole bunch of homeschoolers go to that parish. And as a result, they have a whole family nexus where they're very close to each other. On Sunday, for instance, many of their kids are in the choir. On Sunday afterwards, they have, some 2 or 3 hours optionally. These people meet, have potluck lunches, the adults, while the kids play, and the mothers talk to each other while they watch their little tiny kitties out on the lawn and all this kind of thing. And they do many things together. And so this extends the homeschool nexus that would exist even without the people being in the same parish. So I think this is very good.
And I think that's one expression, I think, of the Benedict option that's already underway. What reading I have done, and it's on the Benedict option, it seems to me that all of those who are out there calling it everything from a hoax to a threat, all of them are using secular arguments that have nothing to do with Benedict and the history of monasticism and the communities that grew up around monasteries. They have so they're arguing against a straw man that those who authentically are discussing the Benedict option. It's these other people are fighting a straw man that doesn't exist.
I think that's a really good argument for focusing on what we could call, shorthand, I guess, the classics of Western spirituality. We have a seemingly endless effort to sell this, to sell that, to sell the other thing, this new approach, that new approach, the other new approach, and it can be tough to get into the rule of St. Benedict, but it would be far better than so many other things that are proposed. And I think one of the good things about homeschooling is, while it too can be surrounded by hucksters, it's a real-life practice that you have to work at, and it can be wonderful for clearing away the verbal slush with which we're surrounded. I think in so many ways this is another ink blot test, but back to the basics. I mean, why don't you people of everywhere hopping on the latest this, that, or whatever, read St. Benedict? That would be the best thing possible.
Oh, let me put in a little ad here. Rhonda edited a book called Spiritual Classics, about the spiritual classics, where I have 20 pages or so of each of the classics as a little introduction to people. And it's called Spirituality for All Times, and it's published by, guess who? En route Books, the sponsors of the station.
I've heard of them.
Yeah, so this is a good way to dip in. So En route Books is the sponsor, and if you just go capital ENROUTE, it's a French word, it's pronounced en route Books, or get it off the radio, it's on the radio list of things too, links. You can dip into these classics, and you could do this in the parish. It has questions for personal reflection and group sharing. So I highly recommend my book.
Forthright.
So where do we go from here?
Well, I think it's getting clearer to me what this is all about. And I think possibly, some books like this, without being something where you want to buy every line in the book, are wonderful catalysts for people with ideas, and hopefully ideas inspired by the Holy Spirit of how to live a Catholic life in a culture such as ours, and instead of just kind of either becoming a hermit. I mean, that's always an option. There's genuine hermits. That's becoming a hermit in the sense of never going anywhere and just holing up in your little house and only going to daily mass and no place else out in the world because it's too worldly, or just sinking into the mores of the culture. There's this Benedict option sounds very good to me.
A part of going back to the basics is for each individual is to figure out what their most proper role in life is, and of course you go to discern your own gifts to figure that one out. That's one of the roads to figuring out the will of God for yourself, is to look at your own gifts and your own impetus, if you will. I finally, after much exploring, found out that spiritual direction was my gift, and now I'm exercising it. But and Rhonda in philosophy and the rest of you, if that's maybe one of the most basic of basics, is start with yourself. What are you doing to improve things? And if you're not, then you're probably not using your real gifts. So everyone should start there, and then develop talents which come from your own gifts.
I completely agree with that. Completely.
Yeah, if everyone did that, there would be no need for movements, whether it be communism, fascism, or Benedict option. There would be no need for movements, because everyone would be contributing to the betterment of the world through their own gifts. Now, I guess that's the ideal of Christianity.
Now, because this is a discussion show, let me push you on that one.
Okay.
There is a question addressed by St. Thomas with regard to what sorts of social mechanisms would be necessary had there not been a fall. And, of course, people of a wholly utopian bent would say, well, if there hadn't been a fall, we wouldn't need this, we wouldn't need that, we wouldn't need the other thing. But Thomas says, even had there not been a fall, there would be need for a political order simply in order to coordinate various social events. There has to be this function of coordination. And if there's a necessary role for the function of coordination, I think honest, candid people will have disagreements about how to work out that coordination. So in that context, there might be movements. I can see some people saying in the Garden of Eden, much more populated than we think of it, well, there has to be more central coordination, and others say, no, we have to decentralize this coordination of hovercraft here in the Garden of Eden.
That's very, very interesting, Jim. I never thought of that.
Well, we tend to think of government, often in thinking of government, we think of government in terms of its coercive function. But government does have an enabling function as well. And even in the Garden of Eden, we'd have to have that enabling function, which would allow for friendly politics, giving rise to that favored acronym that Bob will relate to. That Al will relate to. Who knows? Bob too. BYOB.
Right, bring your own bottle.
Yes. Decentralism at the level of picnics.
Right.
I wanted to add something here that I don't know if this is important or not, but I'm aware of a group that organized a group and promoted what is called home-based communities, and they had a number of people that were doing homeschooling in this group. But what it turned out to be is that a lot of people were joining, but they were joining not for the spiritual part, but they were just joining for the homeschooling part. So sometimes we have to be careful of that, I think. I don't know. Do you think that could be a problem? The group that was associated with thought it was kind of a problem that the home-based communities were spiritual communities, and there was no problem with the homeschooling, but there was too much emphasis on the homeschooling and not on the spiritual.
Mm-hmm. I think so. Yeah, I think so. They make it a utilitarian thing.
Yes, that's right.
There's a parallel. The American labor movement at one point had a strong emphasis on education, including education for the arts. And there were all sorts of labor groups, labor institutions that were educational in function. And this, I think, reflected the cultural interests of the people that were active in developing the labor movement. Now, there were other wings of the labor movement, that's for sure. But by and large, the labor education, the labor cultural enrichment things all died out, because mostly what people were interested in was their paycheck, and they were interested in the union insofar as they had lower hours and better wages, and the these cultural sidebars, well, maybe that was supposed to give labor a deeper foundation, but most people just weren't all that interested.
I think that's more common than not in every movement. But we come back to Pogo again.
Yeah.
We met the enemy and he is us. And that problem will be different in every little family and every little group. But ultimately, any organization like that starts out with the best of intentions eventually gets taken over by someone that wants to remold things in his own image.
Still in awe from being very friendly with different homeschoolers, even though there's all this criticism of that movement that it makes the kids too insular, that they'll never be able to go out into the real world, all that. And that some of them revolt and become, can't stand being stuck together in their little family home that way in spite of efforts to do all sorts of outside sports activities, blah, 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 blah. But just the same, my experience of homeschoolers has been fantastic in terms of, just kids who actually are normal in the sense that a normal kid likes to talk to adults. They don't consider adults to be beyond the pale, and the only people they want to talk to is friends on text.
I guess I can add something to that. Knowing a mutual friend of ours, Rhonda, and I have a friendship with a family that's homeschooling, and I will tell you that I go over there as a fully mature old guy and sit down at dinner with them, and their youngest child can stand toe-to-toe with me on almost any subject. Try that with a public school kid.
It's impressive.
I met a young homeschooled kid a few years ago. I think he finished his homeschooling when he was 16. And he had just come back from Russia when I met him. He was spending 2 years there teaching English. And now he was going to enroll in a law school, one of these Christian law schools. I can't remember the name of it now, but he was certainly ready for the world.
We're going to run out of time here in a minute. Let me give you an analogy from my experience in the Caribbean on the British island. It was often said when I was down there that the British taught the locals just enough education that they would be good followers, not leaders. And I think there's a certain truth to that, because those who were to be leaders were sent back to the great schools of England to get their education, and the few that were selected to be leaders. And that process is probably how the British Empire began to catch hold, after the initial conquest, was by that system. I think what's happening in this country is somewhat the same. Everyone is concerned about the dumbing down of America, which is certainly what our public schools are doing. But these homeschoolers, like those who go off to Oxford and Cambridge and other once fancy places, they're the ones who will emerge as the leaders, I hope and think, as they go up and get absorbed into the culture, because they will have the tools not only to know what to do, but to know what ought to be done. They will become the great leaders in the future, is my hope.
May it be, amen.
Yes.
So I don't know. I think we might see the British Empire culturally, educationally, all over again in some future year here.
So we have 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Next week's topic, I think maybe we'll address that one for just a moment. There's a phrase we often hear that says, I must always follow my own conscience. And I suspect a lot of people who say that and think that haven't taken the time to identify what is a conscience, what is it, and why is it, and why should we always follow our own conscience. So that is going to be our topic and our struggle next week, is to try to define conscience and its proper role in our decision making. Then beyond that, starting out in June, I think we'll just tackle the just war theory. How about that, Jim?
Oh, that would be a scrum if ever there were one.
You and I are going to have fun with that one.
Let me go back to conscience for a minute.
To what? I'm sorry, to what?
To conscience.
Go ahead.
This is probably back for 30 seconds. There are various boards and the like connected with the medical profession that have conscience exemptions and so forth. And so an effort is made to try to define conscience. And that the definitions of conscience you see simply can't make any reference to God. And if conscience ultimately involves the voice of God, then secular efforts to give some standing to conscience, but just the right amount, not too much, involve something like strong personal convictions. Well, strong personal convictions are fine, but sometimes the social good requires that we bypass strong personal convictions. But if conscience is in fact the voice of God, and if in fact we can't have access to the voice of God, then strong social considerations don't take priority. And back a while ago we talked about humility, and if humility ultimately is defined with reference to God, then the secularists, a.k.a. David Hume or many others, can't really speak about humility as understood by Christians. And if secular accounts of what conscience is that want to make a nod to it but not make it decisive, they can't reference God. So they're really in a deep way talking about two different things.
So this is a preview of coming attractions, my friends. Tune in to these pages.
So,
right, we'll be back. We'll be back next week, same time, same station, with the open door. And in the meantime, may God bless each and every one of you. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.